Each day office introvert Rhiannon Lewis fantasizes about whom she would get rid of. She harbors resentment toward many people around, especially her colleagues. Rhiannon also hates her sister Saren, for always ignoring her, and the mother who abandoned them long ago. At the top of her list is Julia Blenkinsop, for bullying her in school. This shattered Rhiannon's self-esteem, making her feel invisible ever since. Rhiannon's gravely ill father Tommy was the only one who supported her, no matter what. He wanted his daughter never to let anyone mistreat her. When the father's condition worsened, Rhiannon went to call for the nurse, but as usual she was ignored. Rhiannon despises herself for being helpless. By the time the medical staff came to the ward, it was too late. Tommy had a heart attack. The girl feels she let down the one person she loved most. Her grief quickly transformed into pure rage. Rhiannon wants everyone around her to suffer. The funeral was held shortly after. Saren, the mother of Tommy's only grandchild, was late. When the priest listed those who had come to say goodbye to Tommy, he mispronounced Rhiannon's name and even referred to her as a caregiver, not a daughter. Rhiannon sought comfort from her sister, but as always was met with complete indifference. A song played in Tommy's memory, one that Rhiannon by the way had chosen. Everyone expressed condolences to Saren, ignoring Tommy's other daughter entirely. Suddenly Rhiannon saw Julia, who was here to offer condolences as well. To say this encounter didn't please Rhiannon is an understatement. She's tired of everyone's indifference toward her. During the wake, Aunt Brenda didn't even recognize her own niece. It's obvious that none of the relatives care about Rhiannon, despite her best efforts to maintain good relations with everyone. Julia also attended the wake. Back in school, Julia had convinced Rhiannon she was a ghost. Now Julia acted overly friendly, asking Rhiannon how she was doing. This baffled the girl since her father had just passed away. Asking about her well-being in such a moment felt totally inappropriate. Saren is already about to fly back to France, but first she wants to discuss selling their father's house and business. This devastated Rhiannon, as she lives in that house. The sister suggested Rhiannon buy her share, but an office worker's salary cannot afford it. In any case, Saren has already hired a realtor, which means Rhiannon will have to move out soon. Before leaving for the airport, Saren advised her sister to meet Julia and have fun. But Rhiannon hates Julia, who lives a perfect life. And now Julia has returned to ruin Rhiannon's life once again. Her only friend is her dog, Ting. The girl feels bitter at the mere thought of the father's house being sold. There's only one solution to this problem: to make her sister cease to exist. Rhiannon fell asleep right in her chair. In the morning, she found her old wig in a drawer, recalling how Julia's bullying once made her pull the hair out. None of Rhiannon's colleagues noticed her 10-day absence. She would gladly get rid of all of them, especially her boss Norman. Rhiannon feels she's capable of much more and asked him to consider her for the junior reporter position. For Norman this came as a real surprise. Naturally he refused, explaining that the position wasn't suitable for her. A reporter's job requires persistence, something Rhiannon just doesn't have. Rhiannon's disappointment and anger knew no bounds, and these emotions threatened to burst out at any moment. A guy named AJ approached the reception desk, demanding to meet with the editor-in-chief. Rhiannon said he wasn't available right now, but AJ didn't seem to care, just like Norman, who immediately hired the guy as a junior reporter. Rhiannon's anger grew at the realization that all her efforts were in vain. She followed AJ down the street, fantasizing about how she would harm him. The guy flinched when his pursuer dropped something. Not knowing how to excuse herself, the girl told AJ that he had forgotten to leave his email address. As always, she had to fake a smile so no one would guess her true intentions. For the first time in a long while, the sister texted Rhiannon. Saren had arranged with a realtor to appraise the house tomorrow. When Rhiannon realized that Julia was the realtor, it was the last straw. She began pulling out her hair again. When she got distracted, her beloved dog Ting got hit by a car. It looked like it was Julia's car. Now Rhiannon truly has nothing left to lose. She buried the pet in the yard and later, after drinking, left a voice message for her sister, saying she had no intention of selling the house, much less letting Julia in. At some point, Rhiannon decided to tell Julia this in person and headed to a nightclub. Julia was there, having fun with her friends and fiancé. When Rhiannon accused Julia of ruining her life, the girl just laughed. To Julia, Rhiannon had never actually existed. She's simply empty space to her. Rhiannon felt like a little girl again, laughed at by everyone. Perhaps Julia was right, and all her failures were her own fault? Rhiannon walked down the street in the rain. She no longer had the support of her father. There was no one left at all. Suddenly a drunk guy began using the gutter as a toilet, as if Rhiannon wasn't even here. In a fit of rage she first kicked him, then went even further and ended his life. Rhiannon wants people to finally start seeing her. After moving the body into the gutter, she left the scene. From now on, Rhiannon would take revenge on all her offenders. For the first time the girl woke up in a good mood, but when she remembered the events of the previous night, she was horrified. Panicking, Rhiannon threw her clothes into the wash. The thought that her beloved pet was gone made her cry. Suddenly the doorbell rang. It was her father's employee, Craig, who immediately noticed the changes in Rhiannon. He was here with a business offer, to buy Tommy's workshop. Rhiannon didn't know how to respond and closed the door in Craig's face. It feels like no one around her cares that she's still grieving the father. In the trash lay the crime weapon, and Rhiannon picked it up. A smile appeared on her face. Rhiannon boiled the knife to wash away any traces from it. On the bus to work, Rhiannon felt like everyone knew what she had done the previous night. Through the window, she saw the police working at the crime scene. At the office, Rhiannon tried to act like nothing had happened. AJ offered her tea. Such kindness caught her off guard. Norman announced to the employees that their publication needed a sensational story. Jeff mentioned the body found in the gutter and received praise from the boss. Rhiannon shared details that only the police could know. However, Norman seemed not to notice. Later, Jeff found out that the body, belonging to a guy in his 20s, had been discovered by a jogger. The cause of demise was 14 wounds. The crime was committed with extreme cruelty. No traces were left behind. Norman speculated that some psycho must have done it. Now they had to act fast so that competing publications didn't get ahead of them. AJ noticed that Rhiannon wanted to be involved in the investigation. He genuinely felt sorry for the girl, whom the boss ignored despite all her efforts. AJ is sure the police will catch the criminal soon. This statement made Rhiannon nervous. However, many criminals get away with their deeds, so it's all just a matter of luck. Later, Jeff called the office, reporting that the victim's name was Ryan Lloyd. For the first time, Rhiannon decided to be brazen and took credit for Jeff's work, asking the boss for permission to personally interview the victim's family. Norman assigned it to AJ anyway, though he allowed Rhiannon to go along with him. She shared that she too had recently faced a loss, 2 losses actually, so she'd be able to understand the feelings of Ryan Lloyd's mother. Rhiannon also shared that lately, she's often been angry. AJ said that's normal, everyone gets angry from time to time. When Rhiannon and AJ arrived at the scene, the girl became very nervous. Mrs. Ryan didn't want to talk to the press, but AJ managed to convince the woman. He's a truly talented journalist. Rhiannon expressed her condolences. Ryan's parents had no idea that they were facing a violent criminal who had taken their son's life. Of course Ryan wasn't a saint, but his family loved him. Unable to listen to the grieving mother's cries any longer, Rhiannon stepped aside and stumbled upon Ryan's room, finding a restraining order in his trash. That's when Rhiannon realized she'd done a good deed. Mr. Lloyd caught her here. Barely hiding her panic, Rhiannon asked AJ to hurry up. On the way, she asked the colleague to stop by Dave Ferris's place. He's the one who had taken Ryan to court. It might be related to Ryan's firing for inappropriate behavior. AJ wondered why Rhiannon was trying to figure out if Ryan deserved such a fate. She said it might be important for the paper, but it sounded unconvincing. Dave explained that his colleague Ryan had sent him obscene links and later spread nasty rumors about him. Thankfully, the company quickly took action and fired Ryan. Now the journalists had 2 perspectives. The victim's parents said he was a nice guy, while his former colleague saw him as a real jerk. Suddenly Rhiannon received a message from her sister saying that Julia had the keys, so Rhiannon's presence wasn't necessary at all. However, she couldn't allow this and asked AJ for a ride. Once there, she quickly washed the blood out of the bathtub and hid the knife. Julia didn't expect anyone to be home and introduced Rhiannon to her colleague, Stella. Every time Rhiannon talked to Julia, she felt helpless for some reason. The realtors concluded that the house needed repairs to sell for a better price. Suddenly Julia complimented Rhiannon's hair, making her even more nervous. The realtors asked Rhiannon to tidy up the house, after which they would return to take photos. Rhiannon no longer wants to be invisible. When Norman found out that it was Jeff, not her, who uncovered the victim's identity, he was very displeased. But AJ stood up for Rhiannon, saying she helped gather a lot of interesting information. Norman was not sure if they should make the victim look bad, but Rhiannon managed to convince him. Jeff was assigned to write the article. Rhiannon was shocked when after their workday, the boss invited her to join him and the others at the bar. Rhiannon gladly accepted. For the first time Norman praised her for good work. Rhiannon had always been invisible, and now she was the center of attention. It felt unusual to her. There in the karaoke bar, she ran into Craig, who asked if she was ready to sign the contract. Rhiannon honestly replied that she wasn't sure if she could trust him with her father's business. This made the girl feel proud of herself. Everything was going perfectly. But Rhiannon panicked when the police entered the bar, announcing they intended to question all potential witnesses. Everyone wants to catch this monster. Unable to handle it, Rhiannon went to the restroom. Turns out she is that very monster. Suddenly Rhiannon noticed an offensive message on the wall about Ryan, and her mood changed instantly. Ryan was a bad person, and she had done a good deed by ridding the world of him. A drunk man named Mike was rude to the bartender. Watching this, Rhiannon said goodbye to her colleagues and followed him outside. The girl had developed a taste for it and wasn't going to stop. Mike Robertson had no idea that death was tailing him as he talked on the phone with his wife, who was accusing him of infidelity. Suddenly Rhiannon called out to Mike, asking him to help her find her dog, which had supposedly hidden behind some dumpsters. Since the girl looked completely harmless, Mike agreed. Taking advantage of the moment, Rhiannon approached him from behind and ended his life. He was her second victim. Rhiannon couldn't stop smiling. Then, as if nothing had happened, she went home. If Rhiannon doesn't get rid of Julia, she risks losing this house. Early in the morning, Rhiannon returned to the crime scene to cover her tracks. Julia was still Rhiannon's main target. Because of her, Rhiannon spent all school breaks hiding in the restroom, but even there, Julia wouldn't leave her alone. Now Rhiannon hates Julia for having a good job, friends, a luxurious house and a handsome fiancé. Karma clearly hasn't done its job, so Rhiannon is determined to take things into her own hands. She cleared out the freezer in the garage to ensure there was enough space. Then Rhiannon gathered everything she needed, including large trash bags. Craig approached her, apologizing for being persistent about buying Tommy's workshop. Softening, Rhiannon promised to think it over. When Craig invited her to a cafe, she agreed. Rhiannon was always annoyed by the rude cashier at the grocery store near her house. The cashier chatted with her friend on the phone through an earpiece and sipped soda, ignoring customers. Before leaving, Rhiannon took the cashier's phone and drowned it in a plastic cup of soda. Rhiannon is no longer the person she used to be. She called Julia and asked her to come by to see if some items in the house were worth selling. Julia said she'd be free tomorrow. Today Rhiannon planned to meet Craig at the cafe. At work, she was no longer invisible. Jeff's article about Ryan Lloyd made it to the newspaper's front page, but Rhiannon's name wasn't mentioned, even though she had made a significant contribution to the investigation. It was very unfair. When Jeff left, Rhiannon added a laxative to his coffee. AJ is the only one who genuinely supports her. Jeff returned to the office kitchen and took his coffee. Mrs. Lloyd stormed into the office, outraged that her son was portrayed in a negative light in the article. As the article's author, Jeff said he took full responsibility. The woman was heartbroken that now everyone would only remember the bad things about her son. Rhiannon stated that Ryan deserved it. A heavy silence fell. Mrs. Lloyd left in tears. No one expected such cruelty from Rhiannon. Soon after, Jeff had a bowel disorder. Rhiannon secretly rejoiced. In the evening, she put on makeup to look beautiful for her meeting with Craig. AJ thought she was going on a date. Rhiannon replied that it was just a business meeting. Time passed, and Craig still hadn't shown up, making Rhiannon nervous. Could he have decided just to make fun of her? But Craig eventually arrived, apologizing for being late. Both felt awkward. For Rhiannon this was a completely new experience, as she'd never been on a date before. And this really was a date. After dinner, Craig didn't expect Rhiannon to kiss him. It turned into passion between them at Craig's place. In the morning, Rhiannon left with a smile, but her mood was dampened by a call from Detective Marina Farrow, who said the police were questioning everyone who was at the bar the night Mike was attacked. Rhiannon arrived at the police station, doing her best to hide her panic. The detective and Sergeant Sager were interested in whether she had seen anything suspicious. Rhiannon said she was just having drinks with her colleagues and supposedly saw a rowdy group of guys disturbing everyone on the dance floor. The detectives intended to check it out. When Sager briefly left at the request of their boss, Diana, who was stubbornly ignoring Marina, Rhiannon asked the detective if her boss always overlooked her. Rhiannon understood her like no one else could. The sergeant interrupted the interrogation as new circumstances had emerged. Afterward, Rhiannon called Julia and canceled their meeting. At the office, everyone was on edge about the second body. It was possible there was a serial criminal in town, because the victim's wounds were similar. Rhiannon continues to monitor Julia's social media pages. Craig messaged her, saying he'd be working late today and wouldn't be able to meet. Rhiannon decided to surprise Craig and showed up at the workshop unannounced, catching him there with Julia, who it turns out plans to buy Tommy's house. Hearing this, Rhiannon felt the ground fall out from under her. Stealing Julia's phone, Rhiannon got into her car and started screaming in despair. Julia is taking everything away from her again. As revenge, Rhiannon punctured her bully's car tire. Then she watched as Craig walked Julia out, and they chatted pleasantly. By the time Julia realized her tire was flat, Craig had already left. Rhiannon rejoiced and, pretending to be kind, approached Julia to ask what had happened. Julia said she'd lost her phone and asked Rhiannon to call a cab. In turn, Rhiannon offered to drive her home. Julia reluctantly agreed, fearing she might run into the serial criminal. On the way, Rhiannon behaved in a deliberately friendly manner. Julia didn't like that they veered toward Rhiannon's house. She said she just wanted to show her something in the garage, since they were talking about buying a house. Barely hiding her irritation, Julia followed the former classmate, not noticing the knife in her hand. Suddenly in the garage, Rhiannon declared that she was the very criminal everyone was looking for. Now Rhiannon was expecting an apology from Julia, who had ruined her life. Not understanding what she should apologize for, Julia tried to escape, but Rhiannon attacked her. Julia managed to fend her off but slipped and fell. Rhiannon knocked her out. Marina Farrow hates her boss for late-night calls and inappropriate tasks. There are also many other people Marina despises, including her landlady and co-workers. Rhiannon deviated from her original plan, not taking Julia's life but kidnapping her instead. Julia doesn't understand why Rhiannon is so fixated on the past, after all they were children then. But this doesn't lessen Rhiannon's resentment, who is convinced she became invisible because of Julia's bullying. And Rhiannon won't let her abuser take the last bit away from her. Suddenly Julia called Rhiannon a loser who blamed everyone else for the fact that her own life hadn't worked out. Rhiannon feels like a helpless little girl again. Leaving Julia tied up in the garage, she left. Rhiannon began unconsciously pulling her hair again, recalling all the childhood fears. However, she is determined to put an end to this. Arriving at the workshop, she told Craig that they needed to talk right now. They retreated to a separate room, and Rhiannon made it clear she wasn't here to talk. Craig definitely liked it. When it was over, Rhiannon left, taking with her a flash drive with surveillance footage. On the bus, she left a voice message for the sister, who hadn't even consulted her before agreeing to sell the house to Julia. Rhiannon was no longer willing to tolerate such treatment. Today at the office, she directly demanded that Norman promote her to junior reporter alongside AJ. To Jeff's annoyance, Norman agreed to put Rhiannon on probation. She already even has a sensational story about a missing woman. Norman assigned the new junior reporter to write the article. And so Rhiannon got what she wanted. AJ was very happy for her. He suggested that the mysterious criminal was like a Robin Hood since all the victims were objectively bad people. When AJ invited Rhiannon to go somewhere together, she said yes. Marina Farrow feels the case has hit a dead end because the criminal left no traces. Now on her boss's orders, Marina is forced to do routine paperwork. Rhiannon got in touch with Julia's friend, Lucille, who was very worried. Rhiannon said that the first 24 hours after someone goes missing are crucial, so she as a reporter, could bring attention to the case. Lucille thought this was a good idea. Norman realized he had made the right choice. She met with Julia's friends, who claimed she had no enemies. Moreover, Julia had no problems at work and was planning her wedding with her fiancé, Marcus. If back in school, these girls didn't talk to Rhiannon, they now found her interesting and invited her to go out for drinks sometime. Meanwhile, Marina was reviewing surveillance footage from the karaoke bar. There were indeed some guys behaving rudely, just as Rhiannon had said. But what caught Marina's attention wasn't this, but the fact that Rhiannon left the bar just a few minutes before Mike was attacked. Rhiannon came to Marcus, who agreed to talk to her, hoping the article in the newspaper would help find Julia. Marcus said that everything was fine in their relationship. Yesterday she didn't come home after work and didn't answer his calls. In the morning, Marcus filed a missing person report with the police. When Marcus went to get a photo of Julia at Rhiannon's request, she stole an expensive bottle of wine, Julia's tank top, and even spilled coffee on the light-colored armchair. Marcus handed the journalist the photo, asking her to do everything she could. Marina began to suspect that Rhiannon had been dishonest, and after reviewing all the evidence, she called the real estate agency, but Julia wasn't there. Despite Jeff's skepticism, Rhiannon's article about Julia was published. Her joy was dampened by a call from the sister, who intended to sell the house, with or without Julia. An appraiser with keys to the house would come by today. Rhiannon immediately rushed over there, fearing her secret might be exposed, and chased away the appraiser Neil. Rhiannon wasn't going to sell the house, no matter what Saren wanted. After doing her makeup, putting on Julia's tank top and drinking the expensive wine, Rhiannon prepared to go to the pub. Julia remained tied up in the garage. Rhiannon was triumphant, savoring the fact that her tormentor had lost everything and would soon die. Ever since childhood, Rhiannon had fantasized about something terrible happening to Julia, and now it was finally becoming a reality. Julia, recognizing her tank top and the bottle of wine from her house, told Rhiannon that she was worthless anyway and her makeup was like an ugly teenager. But now nothing could ruin Rhiannon's mood. Tonight she intended to finish off Julia. However, before leaving, Rhiannon wiped off her ridiculous makeup and changed her clothes. AJ was already waiting for her at the pub, where a quiz night was underway. When asked which serial criminal was hired for a job in 1972, Rhiannon correctly answered, Ted Bundy. Suddenly Craig joined them, acting as if Rhiannon was his girlfriend. Embarrassed, AJ left. Upset by Craig's antics, Rhiannon followed AJ, but he didn't react. Then she noticed very drunk Marcus, who admitted that Julia had periodically left him before too. Rhiannon drove Marcus home. He was unable to have a conversation and fell asleep right away. Taking advantage of this, Rhiannon read his messages with Julia and found something interesting. Back home, Rhiannon took the knife and went into the garage. Now Rhiannon knew that Julia's perfect life on social media was actually a complete lie. The messages on Marcus's phone confirmed it. Rhiannon realized that Julia had not only ruined her life but it also shattered Marcus's self-esteem. Suddenly Julia burst into tears, saying that Marcus was a monster and she didn't know how to escape him. He controlled her every step. Julia's tears threw Rhiannon off balance. Late that night, Marina received a call from the boss, informing her about the missing woman. Marina realized that all these crimes were somehow connected to Rhiannon. A large-scale search for Julia was launched, with many concerned townspeople joining. Rhiannon hated many of them as much as she hated her sister. Julia, whom Rhiannon despised because of her aggressive fiancé, was still in the garage. Rhiannon did not change her mind about taking Julia's life and was starving her. Marina shared the theory with her boss that Rhiannon Lewis was involved in Julia's disappearance and 2 other crimes, as suggested by circumstantial evidence. Perhaps Rhiannon was trying to draw attention to herself this way. Diana found this evidence insufficient and instructed Marina to question Julia's fiancé. Rhiannon fed her captive after all. Julia claimed that Marcus wouldn't stop looking for her and that what she said about him yesterday wasn't serious. But Rhiannon didn't care. Julia wouldn't live much longer anyway. Suddenly the doorbell rang. It was AJ, worried about his colleague who hadn't shown up to work today. Rhiannon said she was sick. She was glad AJ had stopped by, though he claimed it was solely at Norman's request. Rhiannon felt awkward about the incident at the pub. When AJ heard some sounds coming from her house, he assumed she was with Craig and hurried away. She didn't even have time to explain herself. Julia broke something, supposedly by accident. During that time, she managed to reach a pair of scissors and wounded her captor. Julia knew they were already looking for her. She tried to cut the ropes, but Rhiannon knocked her out. Marina was informed that Julia's car had been found. Rhiannon allowed her captive to take a bath. Seeing the scars on Julia's neck, Rhiannon realized her words about Marcus's cruelty were true. But that didn't justify Julia's actions. Rhiannon believed she was doing a good deed by ridding the world of bad people. Marina grew suspicious when she learned that Rhiannon Lewis was the daughter of the deceased owner of the workshop near where the missing woman's car had been found. Marina examined the workshop. Rhiannon wanted to know why Julia bullied her in school. Julia replied that she was also miserable and felt relieved by taking it out on others. Rhiannon was disappointed by the answer. It turned out there was no deep reason behind what had tormented her for years. Julia thought that Rhiannon just conveniently played the victim to do whatever she wanted. Unlike Rhiannon, Julia hadn't had a loving father. Their heart-to-heart talk was interrupted by a message from Craig, informing her that Julia's car had been found near Tommy's workshop and that the police wanted to speak with him. In the evening, Julia complimented Rhiannon's appearance and offered to help her with her style and makeup. Julia knew a lot about it, as Marcus wouldn't let her leave the house without makeup. She had a chance to harm Rhiannon, but for some reason didn't. Things might have been different if they'd been friends in school. Maybe it could have saved them both. Today Rhiannon went to dinner at Craig's house, asking him not to mention to the police that she had also been at the workshop on the night of Julia's disappearance. At the office, Norman suggested that Rhiannon and AJ join the search party to gather as much information about Julia as possible. Jeff hinted to Rhiannon that he'd spoken with Marcus and found out something interesting about her. Rhiannon understood it was blackmail. Before she could do anything, Jeff volunteered to join the search group with her and AJ, reasoning to the boss that someone more experienced was needed. Marina continued to insist that Rhiannon Lewis was directly connected to the series of crimes. Diana didn't like this and reprimanded Marina. Rhiannon and AJ talked to Julia's friends. Rhiannon felt a clear threat from Jeff. The police arrived, Detective Marina Farrow and Sergeant Sager. From the conversation with the missing woman's friends, Marina learned that Julia and Rhiannon had hated each other in school. After that, Marina spoke with Rhiannon, feigning admiration for how she could forget old grievances and help search for the one who bullied her in school. This came as a surprise to AJ. Rhiannon was on the verge of panic. Suddenly Marcus approached her, aware that she had stolen something from his house and spilled coffee on the armchair. He had spoken with Jeff, and now she was about to be fired for her misconduct. AJ stood up for Rhiannon again, but she yelled at him. It was like he was obsessed with her. Rhiannon followed Marcus down the street, pulling the knife from her purse. But just as she was about to strike, she noticed Jeff, who happened to be passing by on his bike. Seeing the knife in Rhiannon's hand, he realized that she was the criminal who had been terrorizing the town. Jeff hurried to get away. Rhiannon ran after him, begging him to listen to her. In the end, Jeff, distracted, ended up getting hit by a car. Just like that, Rhiannon got rid of a witness without even lifting a finger. She wanted to throw the knife into the gutter, but a threatening message made her change her mind. Clearly the message was from Marcus. Marina interrogated Craig, who revealed that he had seen Julia before her disappearance. He claimed that he was helping Julia with a renovation project for the house she was planning to buy from Rhiannon. But Craig denied that Rhiannon was with them that evening. Marina found it strange that the girl wanted to sell the house to her former school bully. She felt that Craig was withholding something from her and asked Sergeant Sager to help her with one matter. Rhiannon went to the garage. She had a plan. Sager didn't like the idea of breaking into the suspect's house, but Marina was certain that Rhiannon was holding Julia there. Meanwhile, Rhiannon suggested to Julia that they frame Marcus for the kidnapping and other crimes. But Julia wasn't sure she could do it. Despite everything, she loved Marcus. However, Rhiannon managed to convince Julia that Marcus was an abuser and deserved to go to jail. Together they devised a plan. Rhiannon only hoped that Julia would not deceive her. Sager managed to talk his colleague out of breaking into Rhiannon's house. In the meantime, Rhiannon took Julia to her and Marcus's country house. After breaking the lock, the alarm went off, meaning Marcus would arrive soon. Rhiannon made sure it looked like someone had been held there for several days. A few minutes later, Marcus arrived and was horrified to see his fiancée tied up. Rhiannon meanwhile hid, ready to call the police from Julia's phone. But things didn't go according to plan. Marcus was only interested in whether Julia had been unfaithful to him. In a fit of rage he attacked her, and Rhiannon had to intervene. Marcus didn't understand what was happening. Julia declared that there would be no wedding. Marcus began begging his bride not to leave him, saying he was crazy about her. Marcus's tears and threats to harm himself made Julia change her mind. Rhiannon decided to take control of the situation and pushed Marcus from the second floor. The fall proved fatal for him. The police arrived. Marina immediately understood everything when she saw Rhiannon next to Julia. Rhiannon was arrested, her fingerprints taken, and she was subjected to other necessary procedures. Marina was ready to start the interrogation, with Diana also present. Rhiannon repeatedly asked where Julia was. She too was questioned. Rhiannon claimed that she found Julia through her journalistic intuition. She supposedly sensed Marcus was involved after receiving his threatening messages. Julia confirmed Rhiannon's story that Marcus had kidnapped her. But Marina didn't believe it and continued to apply psychological pressure on Julia, who insisted that Marcus had accidentally slipped and fallen. The knife found in the country house was a carpenter's knife. Such knives are usually used as tools in workshops. And Rhiannon's father happened to be a carpenter. Everything pointed to Rhiannon's involvement, and she had a motive. Marina was certain of it. Diana was very displeased with the detective's persistence, given that there was no evidence against Rhiannon and that Julia had confirmed her story. Rhiannon and Julia were released. Craig picked Rhiannon up from the police station and offered to take her to his place, but she needed to go somewhere else. The press surrounded Julia's house. AJ was there too. He hugged Rhiannon, whom he'd been very worried about. She in turn apologized for her behavior last time. Rhiannon had hoped to find Julia here, but she still hadn't appeared. AJ wanted to be with Rhiannon, but Craig continued to act as if they were a couple. He drove her home. On the doorstep, Rhiannon found a package containing her father's ashes. Julia had nowhere to go but to Rhiannon, even though she had incidentally taken the life of her fiancé. Julia didn't know what to feel. Rhiannon convinced her that all the bad things were behind them. Marcus was gone, so Julia was free. Realizing this, she hugged Rhiannon. The girls became friends, deciding to celebrate the fact that the world now had one less bad person in it. Marina felt a powerless rage over the fact that the criminal had gotten away with everything. The question was, why was Julia covering for her? At the bar, the girls ordered champagne and toasted to freedom. Rhiannon advised Julia to tell the press the whole truth about her relationship with Marcus. It could help many women in similar situations. A handsome guy approached the girls' table and started flirting, but was turned down. Rhiannon was ready to stand up to anyone who hurt Julia, even though had promised it wouldn't happen again. Right now Julia just wanted to get drunk and asked Rhiannon for her bank card to withdraw some cash. Marcus had prudently frozen Julia's cards. Meanwhile, Marina came to Rhiannon's house, but she wasn't there. Without hesitation, the detective decided to break into the house. Julia's friends joined the girls. They rocked out at the nightclub, leaving all the bad things behind. Rhiannon was definitely no longer invisible. Marina examined the garage. Her attention was drawn to the freezer. However, it was empty inside. AJ sent Rhiannon some messages, making her smile. She didn't expect Craig to show up. Marina searched Rhiannon's room and found the flash drive from Tommy's workshop in the drawer. Surveillance footage confirmed that on the night of Julia's disappearance, Rhiannon was not only there but had punctured her tire. Marina realized she'd hit the jackpot. The girls watched the sunrise on the rooftop of a high-rise. It was a good place to scatter the father's ashes and say goodbye to him forever. Craig, by the way, fell asleep right here, but his presence didn't bother the girls. Rhiannon felt omnipotent, knowing that people finally began to notice her. Julia in turn didn't know how to build her life going forward. Rhiannon offered to live together. Julia definitely had a lot to think about. Rhiannon realized she wanted to be with AJ, not Craig. Returning home and finding Marina there, Rhiannon was very scared. Marina made it clear that she had the flash drive. She never doubted Rhiannon's guilt. Marina acted illegally, so she couldn't use it as evidence. But she was confident that sooner or later, Rhiannon would lose control and start looking for a new victim. And that's when Marina would catch her. This didn't scare Rhiannon, as she had started a new life and had no reason to lose control. Before leaving, Marina told the girl that it was all a facade. Her life was now emptier than ever. The next morning, Rhiannon brought Julia to the editorial office for an interview. The colleagues started congratulating Rhiannon on her success. Julia gave an interview, saying her life with Marcus had been hell. She didn't even feel like a human, a person. Saying this, Julia couldn't hold back her emotions. After the interview, she hurried out. Concerned, Rhiannon followed her, asking if everything was okay. Julia assured her it was just a hangover. The girls agreed to meet up later that day. Craig was very happy to see Rhiannon in the workshop and didn't expect her to suggest staying just friends. In her view, their relationship was empty. Craig realized Rhiannon had used him when she asked him to lie to the police. He agreed to keep quiet on the condition that she sell him Tommy's business. He didn't want to resort to blackmail, but he felt this would be fair. Rhiannon had to agree to it. Of course, she couldn't resist insulting Craig before leaving. Evening had come, and Julia still hadn't shown up. Rhiannon left her a voicemail, while ignoring calls from the sister. The doorbell rang. AJ stood on the doorstep. Rhiannon invited him inside, announcing that she'd broken up with Craig. This was good news for AJ. They kissed, and AJ spent the night at Rhiannon's place. Julia still wasn't responding to her messages, but she was using Rhiannon's card. Rhiannon's calls also went unanswered. She didn't know that during the investigation, AJ had befriended Marina. And now Marina had sent him a picture of the crime weapon. AJ recognized Rhiannon's knife and demanded an explanation. At first, Rhiannon denied everything, but eventually she was forced to admit that she was behind all those crimes. Rhiannon still believed she was doing good deeds, ridding the world of bad people. AJ wasn't willing to stay in that house for another second. Rhiannon followed her beloved, begging him to stay and promising it would never happen again. But AJ called her a monster in response. Seeing no other way, Rhiannon took his life. When her sister Saren walked in, she witnessed a horrifying scene. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel not to miss more exciting new products. Also, the authors will be pleased if you leave your opinion in the comments.